Well, hi everybody. It's Kim Winter from Logistics Executive Group again, and thanks for joining us. And today I'm absolutely rapt and honoured to be interviewing a gentleman that I met really 20, 30 years ago in my logistics and supply chain career. He is one of the preeminent thought leaders globally and has been now for many decades. And apart from that, an absolutely charming and fantastic guy to know. I'm talking about a gentleman who has 50 plus years experience and knowledge as a leader, as a mentor, and as an educator and as a practitioner right throughout the entire logistics and supply chain market. Very, very hard to find anybody with the credentials that Professor has got. And at this point, I'd like to introduce the Emeritus Professor of Marketing and Logistics from Cranfield, the home for many people around the world of logistics and supply chain, Professor Martin Christopher. Hey, Martin, how you doing?
Great, Kim, and thank you very much for that very, very generous introduction. I'm impressed with myself.
Well, it's all true, of course, in your case, and I guess that we've got you in the UK at the moment.
Yeah, very much so. Just emerging from lockdown and hopefully looking forward to a return to a degree of normal life.
Absolutely, and it's been a pleasure. I've managed to bump into you from time to time, mainly at global level events in Australia, certainly I think South Africa, various places around the world. And today I really want to do an exploration of the journey to date. As mentioned, you really are one of the leading thought leaders across the world in logistics and supply chain, published many, many times. And I do want to talk about some of your published work as well. And I think, if I'm not wrong, you first published something like 50 years ago.
Yeah, it's a bit of a sort of anniversary year in a sense. It was 1971, and this was the book. I've actually managed to find it in a dusty bookshelf here in my library at home. Total Distribution, it was called, because in those days we weren't really talking about logistics and certainly not about supply chain management. In the States, what was called PDM, Physical Distribution Management, was really, I think, the sort of starting point for this, which I guess would emerge in the sort of mid-60s, early 70s. I had the benefit of being, first of all, a postgraduate student at Bradford University, then a very junior lecturer. And that was around about 1970 when I joined the faculty there. And we had the benefit of a couple of visiting professors from the States come to spend time with us in Bradford, and they were talking the gospel of preaching the gospel of PDM. One of them was Bud Lalonde, now sadly no longer with us. Other leaders like Don Bowersox, also sadly gone, and a really good a friend of mine from Oregon State University also passed away, Phil Sherry. It's terrible to think of all the sort of pantheon of these early thought leaders who've now gone to that sort of great warehouse in the sky. But I'm very honoured to have had the benefit of their thinking. And I think what we saw in that sort of early period in the sort of 70s was a growing recognition of the importance of customer service, because for me, this is where it began. I started my life in marketing, and what we'd failed to recognize in those early years, people would talk about the marketing mix and so forth, was they weren't actually including issues like how do you serve the customer. They're talking about product strategy, pricing, obviously advertising and communications, but not a lot of emphasis placed on customer service. But that started to change in the 70s. We had people like Peters and Waterman doing their research on In Search of Excellence, and stating today what we'd consider to be the blindingly obvious, that customers actually want to be looked after, want to be treated with a certain amount of respect, and want value for money. And it was linking this to how to the sort of delivery system, so to speak. I mean, marketing was very much about value creation, and I guess logistics increasingly was about how we deliver that value. And it was bringing these two things together. So when I became a full professor, I took on the title of Professor of Marketing and Logistics. And that was at Cranfield University, where I moved in 1972, and where I set up the Center for Logistics and Supply Chain Management. And I think it was that sort of great opportunity at that time that there was this growing awareness in business and I guess in business schools too, that it was really critical that we really started to look properly at the sort of architecture of our systems by which we actually delivered that value. Because prior to that, it was really about, I guess, what we used to call trucks and sheds. You know, it was transport, it was warehousing, but that was it, basically. We weren't talking the language of supply chains.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's, I've got to say, having read much of your work and over the years, you certainly draw those strands of the customer as opposed to that supply side, and this is what we have and this is what you get in the supply chain to really where it's very, very heavily focused now, with the major players in the market flipping their strategies almost on their heads and going to the market, to the customer and saying, what is it that you want? We will build your supply chains and your logistics infrastructure all the way back, all the way through to the manufacturing, end-to-end, upstream, downstream. And we see Amazon doing that. We see the likes of Maersk doing it in a very, very big way with billions of dollars worth of investment. And you can only assume that really COVID has accelerated things over the last couple of years in that direction.
Yeah, well, I think COVID has certainly brought the supply chain to prominence amongst, politicians, people who in the past never even gave a second thought to, how does stuff get onto the shelf. It's only when, of course, we see shortages like we're witnessing now right across the piece, where we witness periodically, panic buying. And it's really interesting to look at the media particularly. And, if we were to do a search back in, even year 2000 on the phrase supply chain management, you wouldn't really find it too much in the everyday press. If you did that search now, you'd be overwhelmed. Pretty well every day there's something in there about supply chains, which is great because I think what it's doing is it's really bringing it right to the sort of the top of the agenda, not just in organizations, but in government too. Yeah. And I think realizing just how interconnected this world of ours is.
Sure. Yeah, I think I don't think any practitioners of the art or the science of supply chain and logistics could have really ever imagined just what's taken place in the last 24 months or so. It's been outrageous and incredible. And some of the results and some of the transformations that we've seen of some of the big players globally and including the massive consolidation that we're seeing right across with the big players, the acquisitions that are taking place, the joint ventures, it really is a bit of a lolly scramble at the moment, yeah?
Yes, and I think, even in a few years' time, if we were to have this conversation again, I'm pretty certain that things will have moved on even further. I mean, the revolution that's currently taking place, and I think has been accelerated by COVID and so forth, around digitization, basically, is going to transform, even traditional supply chain arrangements. I've just been looking in a bit more detail at things like procurement, for instance, where until very recently, that was, pretty well locked in the sort of mindset of the sort of the last century anyway, certainly. Yep. And we weren't applying anything like the sort of sophistication that we do today in terms of how a lot of the processes are being automated, in terms of how we're increasingly connected, if you like, in a much more real-time, end-to-end sort of way, right up into our, beyond the first tier into second and third tier and so forth. And this is really transforming, I think, the way we call it connectivity now, but it's actually making this idea of a supply chain into a reality. In the past, we've talked about the need for better communication and linking and integration, but we're actually doing it now, and this is the big transformation that's really happening, I think.
Yeah, I think as you say, the awareness and understanding of what can go wrong and the disruptions that have taken place have brought an unfortunate awareness, I guess, but for all of those involved right throughout the supply chain, it's meant that the capabilities are brought front and centre. And from our point of view, as you're aware, we've got a global executive search and coaching business as well as our consulting business. On the search side, people talk about the war for talent. Well, it is an absolute scramble for talent. There just aren't enough quality, educated, qualified, capable people around. And I recently had a podcast with SAPIC in South Africa, and we were talking a lot about, I was on a panel talking a lot about where the next talent comes from. And you've been one of the great teachers and one of the great coaches most of your life at Cranfield and for many other institutions. What do you think some of the major capabilities are, or what are some of the major aspects of availability people should be looking at for the
well, I agree with you certainly about the sort of the need for growing more talent here. The good news is actually I think a lot of business schools now have followed in a way Cranfield's lead, but it wasn't just us, but other pioneers in establishing specialist programs in supply chain management. All right, the program I know best is the Cranfield program. I mean, this year in October, we just registered 250 students on the master's degree in logistics and supply chain management. That's a record for us.
That's big.
And it's actually the biggest degree program in our whole university. So it's just amazing, really. But I think in terms of what, it's not just numbers. I think what's important actually is what we cover in the curriculum, because again, if I go back to those early days, it was largely things like inventory control, vehicle routing and scheduling, very technical sort of, and that's still critical. It's still very much required. But I like to think of this in the way that some sort of, psychologists talk about, the brain having a left side and a right side. Yep. And much of the curriculum in the past was very much about the left side, which is analytical. It's to do with sort of logic and, A to B to C. And it's great for sort of formulas and sort of, optimization concepts and so on. And that's how most of us have been taught, basically, if we look back at, where we were taught and what we learned. Whereas I think increasingly we need a bit more of the right brain, because this is about how we're going to manage relationships across a network. It's about understanding complexity. It's about ambiguity, I should say.
Yeah, sure.
And it's really about how we cope in what some have called this VUCA world, volatile, uncertain. And this, I think, is perhaps the bit that's missing in our curriculum at the moment.
Sure. Well, some of the educators I've spoken to in recent months have been talking more and more about the need to really cater for millennial and Z generation mindset, where they're so endowed with capability in the digital world and e-commerce and all of those key essential areas that we in supply chain really are playing into, and the way that the consumer themselves, many of them, of course, of a lot younger generations than yourself and myself, are really attuned in there, so that the people we need to get into supply chain are young people, and where we're finding they don't necessarily have qualifications as such, for the likes of an MBA, but bringing young people in with those broader skills and capabilities and letting them run rampant and letting them pick up and absorb what needs to happen inside the logistics and supply chain space.
Yeah. No, I'm with you there, Kim. Yeah.
Yeah. No, very good. So Martin, I know behind you, you've got the Logistics and Supply Chain Management book, which I have read, and I think I probably had 2 versions ago. I want to talk to you about that, but we're going to do that in a separate session because that in itself has got so much content. I want to discuss that in detail. So to wrap this particular interview up, I really would just like to get from you a sense of, for anybody, whatever age group they might be, and whatever level they might be, if they see and can understand with the visibility that logistics and supply chain now has and are prepared to jump in if they're coming from outside of that space, what are the sorts of ways that people should look to engage and get themselves involved in logistics and supply chain?
Well, obviously, I think the first thing is to sort of really just look around them and start to ask questions about how do things get on the shelf, for instance. So it's, even at a very basic sort of level, it's about taking an interest in where things come from, how we get, for instance, Amazon. If we like to call it the Amazon effect, how come we can order something online this afternoon and get it delivered tomorrow? Just to sort of think that one through, and then to sort of try and maybe, if you're really interested in this, to sort of say, okay, well, how can I follow this one up? It's starting to be the case now that we're seeing quite a few undergraduate programs, for instance. There's a lot of vocational programs available now, which are at the sort of the coalface level, which is a good starting point. It's to do with things like obviously transport and warehousing, but it's also to do basically with recognizing that logistics is all around us.
Yeah.
And these professions, which I like to think of as professions, in the past that were just seen as a trade, are really going to be so critical that this is a really great place if you're looking to forge a successful career. This is a really good place to begin with. It's like wanting to be a doctor or a lawyer or something like this. It's that important.
Yeah, I think I hear what you're saying, and I would echo that in terms of the fact that all the big companies and all the players across e-commerce, the likes of Amazon, the likes of the big shipping companies are all very, very short of talent right now. So whilst, sure enough, during COVID, a lot of organisations, a lot of industries, the aviation sector, passenger aviation, airlines in particular, have taken a very big hit. There are massive opportunities right across the supply chain, and especially across, as you say, digital and e-commerce. Hey, Martin, look, really fantastic to catch up with you. I know you're an extremely busy man, and we've been planning this for a while, so I really do appreciate it. Thank you so much for your time. It's been an absolute pleasure to know you over the last 20-odd years, and I look forward to having a chat with you again soon about logistics and supply chain management, the book behind you, and look forward to bringing that out to our audience as well. Martin Christopher, Emeritus Professor of Logistics and Management and Supply Chain and all things in between at Cranfield, and one of the great thought leaders globally. Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you very much, Kim. Look forward to talking to you again.
Thanks so much.